Wisdom Radio.
There is a moment that most of us know well, even if we have never given it a name. It is the moment after we have shared something, a plan we were excited about, a dream we had been quietly carrying, a decision we had finally arrived at after a long time of uncertainty, and the response we received was not quite what we were hoping for. Maybe it was a small deflation in the other person's expression. Maybe it was a word of caution that landed more like a wall than a door. Maybe it was enthusiasm that felt performative rather than genuine, or silence where warmth should have been. And in the aftermath of that moment, there is often a subtle but real sense of having given something away, of having opened a door that perhaps was not yet ready to be opened to someone who was not yet ready to walk through it with care. Baltasar Gracian, the 17th century Spanish philosopher, whose observations on human nature remain among the most penetrating ever written, had a great deal to say about this experience, not because he was cynical about people, but because he was honest about them. He understood that the impulse to share is one of our most natural instincts, and one of our most frequently costly ones. And he spent years developing a principle that he considered among the most practically important a person could learn, the principle he called, in different forms throughout his writing, the wisdom of selective revelation. To understand why this matters, it helps to start with why we overshare in the first place, because it is not carelessness, and it is not stupidity, and it is not a character flaw that only certain people carry. It is something much more universal than any of those things. We share because sharing feels like connection, and connection is one of the deepest needs we carry as human beings. When something matters to us, a goal, a hope, a new direction, it lives inside us with a kind of pressure, the way a room fills with warmth when there is a fire inside it, and the natural release of that pressure is to speak it aloud, to let it out into the world, to make it real by giving it an audience. There is also something else at work, something that psychologists have observed, and that Gracian intuited 3.5 centuries before modern research gave it a name. When we tell someone about a goal or a plan, our brain registers a small version of the satisfaction that comes from actually achieving it. The telling feels like progress. The sharing feels like a kind of arrival, and so we tell, often before the plan is ready, often before we are ready, and often to people who have not yet demonstrated that they are safe recipients of our most tender ambitions. Gracian did not frame this as a psychological observation. He framed it as a strategic one. He had watched across decades of life in courts and institutions and the complicated social worlds of his century how often people undermined their own best efforts simply by revealing them too soon to too many, with too little discernment. He had seen how a plan spoken aloud in the wrong room could collect objections before it had the strength to withstand them. He had seen how an ambition shared with the wrong person could be quietly discouraged, or worse, quietly appropriated, reshaped and redirected in ways that served that person's interests rather than the one who had done the dreaming. And he had seen on the other side of this how the people who moved most effectively through the world tended to share their intentions selectively and deliberately, revealing what was useful to reveal, protecting what was not yet ready to be seen, and maintaining a quality of interior quiet that gave their plans the space to develop before the world had a chance to weigh in on them. The key word in all of this is selective. Gracian was not advocating for secrecy as a way of life, and he was not suggesting that openness is naive or that trust is something to be withheld from everyone indefinitely. What he was saying is more precise than that, and more useful. That there are tiers of access to your inner world, and that different people in your life have earned different tiers, and that the confusion of those tiers, the sharing of deep things with people who have only demonstrated they deserve surface things, is one of the most common and most quietly damaging mistakes that people make. Think about it in terms of a house. There is the front step, where you might exchange pleasantries with someone you have just met. Pleasant, appropriate, warm, but revealing very little of who you actually are or what you actually want. There is the front room where acquaintances sit, people you know and like, people who are generally well disposed toward you, but with whom the relationship has not yet accumulated the depth and the history that trust requires. There is the kitchen, the real room, the lived-in room, where the people sit who have shown up consistently, who have demonstrated through their actions, rather than just their words, that they are genuinely invested in your flourishing. And there are the rooms at the back of the house that perhaps nobody visits, the innermost spaces of your ambition, your uncertainty, your most fragile and most important becoming, that are yours alone, at least for now, at least until they are strong enough to survive the light. The practice Gracian is pointing toward is simply the practice of knowing which room you are in with each person in your life and sharing accordingly. Not coldly, not with calculation designed to manipulate, but with a quiet and self-respecting awareness that your inner world is valuable, that your plans and your dreams and your emerging sense of who you are becoming deserve the same care that you would give anything else you considered precious. You would not leave something irreplaceable in a room without first knowing that the room was safe. Your deepest ambitions deserve at least the same consideration. There is also a second dimension to selective revelation that Gracian returned to throughout his work, and that operates somewhat differently from the question of trust. It is the question of timing. Even with people who have genuinely earned deep access to your world, even with the people who sit in your kitchen, who have shown up and stayed and demonstrated their care, there is still a question of when to share, and the answer is not always immediately. A plan that is still forming, still finding its shape, still searching for the confidence it will need to survive contact with the real world, such a plan is vulnerable in a particular way that has nothing to do with the intentions of the person you share it with. It is vulnerable simply because it is not yet finished, and unfinished things are easily disturbed, not necessarily by hostility, but by the entirely natural tendency of other minds to reshape what they encounter in the direction of their own experience and their own fears. A trusted friend who struggled with a similar ambition may unconsciously project that struggle onto yours. A person who loves you and fears for you may offer caution that is entirely sincere and entirely unhelpful at the stage your plan is currently in. Gracian's counsel, translated into the most practical possible terms, is this: let things ripen before you bring them into the open. Give your plans the private time they need to become strong enough to withstand the weight of other people's perspectives. Not forever, just long enough. And then there's the third dimension, which is perhaps the most counterintuitive of the three. Gracian believed that a quality of mystery, of being not entirely legible to the people around you, was not merely protective, but genuinely powerful. When the people in your life can predict you completely, when they know exactly what you want, what you fear, what will please you, and what will wound you, they have, whether they intend to or not, a map of how to manage you. They know which praise will keep you performing for them. They know which pressure will make you comply. They know how to position themselves in relation to your desires and your vulnerabilities in ways that serve their interests alongside, or sometimes instead of, yours. But when you carry a calm and unreadable interior, when you are warm and present and engaged with people without being entirely transparent, something shifts. You become slightly harder to predict, and things that are harder to predict tend to be treated with more care and more respect. This is not a manipulation tactic. It is simply the recognition that complete transparency, despite what our current culture sometimes suggests, is not always a virtue, that there is a meaningful difference between honesty and exposure, and that choosing not to expose everything is not the same thing as being false. Honesty means telling the truth when it matters. Exposure means offering your full interior life on demand to whoever happens to be present and curious. You are not obligated to do the second simply because you are committed to the first. So what does this look like in practice? Not as a philosophy, but as something you can actually carry into the ordinary texture of your daily life. The practice is simple, and it begins with a single habit of mind. Before you share something that matters to you, pause for just a moment and ask yourself 2 questions. The first question is, who is this person to me? Not who they are in terms of role or status, not whether they are your colleague or your friend or your family member, but what they have actually demonstrated through their behavior over time. Have they shown that they handle your vulnerabilities with care? Have they shown up when showing up cost them something? Do you feel, after time with them, more like yourself or less? The second question is this ready to be seen? Has this plan, this hope, this emerging version of yourself had enough private time to find its footing? Is it strong enough yet to survive contact with perspectives other than your own? Or does it need a little more time in the quiet, a little more tending before it meets the world? These 2 questions will not always give you a clear answer. Sometimes the right choice will still be genuinely uncertain, but the habit of asking them consistently and honestly will over time shift the quality of what you share, with whom you share it, and when. And that shift, quiet as it is, will change things, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the slow and reliable way that all real changes happen, through the accumulation of small, deliberate choices made in ordinary moments by someone who has decided to treat their inner world as something worth protecting. You have been listening to Night Wisdom Radio. For those who prefer to move through the world with intention rather than impulse. If tonight's reflection stirred something in you, I would love to hear about it in the comments, particularly this. Which of the 2 questions felt more challenging? knowing who has truly earned access to your inner world, or knowing when something is ready to be seen. If you found value here, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe with notifications on. There is more to come, and the next reflection may be exactly the one you needed to hear. Thank you for spending this quiet time here. Sleep wisely, reflect deeply, and guard what matters.